Before that, I have a great pleasure of welcoming an old friend, Jean-Marc Denis. We know each other for years now. And Jean-Marc Denis is the chair of the board of European Processor Initiative. The position he assumed in July 2021 when he joined Cyper, the company designing the European HPC microprocessor, and he is the chief strategy officer there. Jean-Marc, after 5 years of research in the development of new solvers for the Maxwell equations at Matra, France, as a mathematician from 1990 to 95. After that, he had several technical positions in the HPC industry between 95 and 2004. From HPC pre-sales to senior solution architect. Since mid-2004, Jean-Marc had worked at Boule SAS headquarters in France, where he had started the HPC activity. In less than 10 years, the HPC revenue at Boule exploded from nothing in 2004 to 200 million euro in 2015. And you have seen how many new systems Atos has now implemented in our Euro HPC program. So with that, sorry for jumping right to the talk. Please study this very interesting career path of Jean-Marc, and today Jean-Marc will be talking about the European Processor Initiative and Cyper and very interesting things that are happening here. Welcome, Jean-Marc.
Thank you very much for the introduction, for the very nice and positive introduction. To start with, I would like to make a comment. That will be my very last talk as a chair of the board for the European Processor Initiative. So this is a great honor to be with you. Just because I have joined Cyper, the company I created with a few other people, that is the industrial hand for the European Processor Initiative. So doing that, obviously, I have to keep some level of, let's say, neutrality. So I prefer to resign on there is a new chair for the European Processor Initiative. And you will see hopefully more coming from Cyper, and I'm going to talk about that later on. But I'm not here today to talk about products. I'm here today to talk about the European, let's say, strategy toward exascale and how the overall vision we have in Europe is reshaping the design on the architecture of microprocessors. And there will be very close connections to the previous talk, especially about workflows. You will see that in a few seconds. So let me play with the button. Oh, it works. It works. It's magic. So at first, let's talk about EPI in the European HPC strategy. So I will not describe in extent the history. Just to mention that it didn't start yesterday or the day before. It started in 2015 officially, when Jean-Claude Juncker announced that he wanted to have in Europe at least one top 3 system by 2020 based on European technology. A great ambition. At that time, in 2015, everybody thought that it would be possible to have an exascale machine, an exaflop machine in 2020. Obviously, Europe is Europe. Everything takes longer than expected. So the Euro HPC initiative was launched 2 years later with Vice President Andrus Ansip. Then, end of 2017, the European Processor Initiative was created, and we started our development 1 year later. And then we had a new commission setting the bar at a even higher level, with President Ursula von der Leyen confirming that HPC on supercomputers is a strategic asset for the long-term sovereignty and autonomy in Europe. So she explicitly mentioned that the European industry not only science, not only research, the European industry will develop our own next generation microprocessor. A very strong statement from the President of the European Commission. And Commissioner Breton, ex-CEO at Ethos, and he was my boss, said by end of last year that the budget that is expected toward, let's say, for Digital Europe, for setting the European digital environment is about 145 billion euros, out of which about 8 billion is dedicated to the European supercomputers. So a strong ambition in Europe, and this ambition is as strong as in the US or as in China, as we will see on the next slide. So if you look in numbers, in a very hard facts, what EuroHPC has achieved so far. So we used to talk about the US exascale machine, the Chinese exascale machine, but indeed, we already have that in Europe. When you look at the concrete results with the pre-exascale, with the petascale systems, so this is in green and this is in orange of this chart, it's already a big success. And when you add the future, just summing up the pre-exascale, the one that will come also in Barcelona, plus the petascale, we are already above 1 exaflop, which is a big achievement. But as opposed to China or the US, this is not centralized in one place. This is spread out of Europe in order we can address at the European level all the needs of the European scientific and industrial community. And with the future exaflop plus machine that could be in Germany and in France, as everyone expects, then Europe will get, let's say, more than 3 exaflops, and likely in the range of 4 to 5 exaflops. So this is big, this is very significant, and this is extremely well aligned with the European strategy to serve the 27 countries. So we can be very proud about what EuroHPC has achieved so far. So now, if we look at the European Processor Initiative objectives, we have one overall objective. This is to develop a complete European designed high-end microprocessor addressing the supercomputing on edge HPC segments. One could tell me, okay, that's very nice, but edge is not HPC. This is true to some extent, but we cannot just develop a processor for supercomputers. If we do that, then we will have a very nice one-shot processor, but we will not have set up an economical model sustainable over time. So we need to address high-end demand from supercomputers on market demand, so a massive demand from the field with edge computing. Unfortunately, we see a strong convergence of the specification between HPC and edge computing, not necessarily, let's say, embedded computing. Edge computing is also infrastructure edge, but I will not describe that today. That would require much more time. So if we look at the short-term objective, we have to supply to Europe the processor that will operate the European exascale machines. So this is almost tomorrow, by 2023. And at the same time, we also have to address the long-term objectives of Europe. This is to develop our own industrial ecosystem from intellectual property up to the manufacturing, if one day we have a sub 3 nanometer fab in Europe, but this is not the purpose, but at least up to tape out. And today that will be done in Taiwan because this is a place to be, to manufacture with the most advanced processes. But actually, manufacturing in Europe is absolutely not critical in terms of sovereignty. Taiwan or South Korea are the place to be, and all companies are manufacturing in those places. So it's not a big issue to be there. So we need to address, for the short-term objective, very high technical readiness levels, typically from 6 to 9. So industrial products based on existing IP, because we have no time to invent new instruction set and new IP. And we need to address long-term objectives, setting up new IP, a new environment, a new software ecosystem. That's very tricky to address the whole TRL levels simultaneously. But this is exactly what we intend to do with the European Processor Initiative. And we have the best partners for that with, well, I will not describe all of them, but you can see the best of the most, let's say, known supercomputing centers in Europe, plus part of the of very recognized industrial companies from HPC, but also from the automotive industry. And now we are going to extend to additional industrial partners that I couldn't disclose today. So when we want to translate, let's say, a funded project like EPI into real products, obviously we need to start from the intellectual property and research, and we need to translate that into products. So from intellectual property to product, meaning from the European Processor Initiative to CYPER. And CYPER has been created in 2019 specifically to this purpose. This is to integrate all the developments coming from EPI and to produce the processor and sell it. So this is very important to have this articulation between project, research and innovation product, and the European industry. If we fail on this, then there will be no European industry in HPC. So if we look at the overall roadmap we have with the European Processor Initiative, it is exactly the translation in milestones on timeline of the strategy I have described. For the short-term objective, we work with ARM instruction set. So the first generation will be based on the ARM Zeus core. So this is also known officially as the Neoverse V1 core. And for the long-term objectives, we are developing with RISC-V, at first developing IP on test chip. Then we will have an accelerator. On post 2025-26, we start having general purpose processor based on RISC-V for high-end computing. So we will address the needs of the first generation exascale machines with a general purpose processor based on ARM. And I'm going to explain the consequences in terms of overall systems. So now let's look at the specifications for the exascale and post-exascale supercomputers. This is something quite simple indeed. So before artificial intelligence, well, I don't like very much to use the word artificial intelligence because it's not very intelligent, while it is totally artificial. So before that, we had the classical HPC models, theoretical models, then an HPC applications, and we obtained results. Then, when we combine classical HPC model with artificial intelligence, we still have those three steps. With artificial intelligence, we have creation of data, of big data, then it is transferred with machine learning to artificial intelligence, and that produces results. So we can start to see that if we combine the classical model with artificial intelligence, we can start having some kind of loop between the classical model and artificial intelligence and the other way around. So that is very easy to see that we can create workflows out of the combination of classical HPC with artificial intelligence. And we have a very simple example of that, and I want to thank the people from ETP for HPC and specifically Peter Bauer, Mark Duranton, and Michael Miles to have described this workflow coming from weather forecast with a specific purpose of extreme predictions. And we can see that unfortunately the weather is becoming very, very extreme and unpredictable. Look at what happened in Belgium and in Germany during the weekend and at the end of last week, to see that this kind of model based on workflows is becoming crucial for the future. So in this workflow, we can see we have data coming from the edge, we have supercomputers, and it works in a cloudized model. So very complex workflow to manage, but this is what's going to happen in the future. So when we look at what it means, we have the data coming from IoT, from sensor, and most of them basically are based on ARM. Then we can see edge computing in the middle, feeding the workflows, and this is a combination of x86 and ARM, mostly ARM, bit x86, and in the public cloud and private cloud, we see now combination of x86 and ARM, with x86 becoming dominant still, and with ARM growing up very fast. Look at AWS announcement. And then we have the classical supercomputers like Summit, Taulight, the Sunway machine, or the Fugaku machine, to crunch at extreme speed all the data on the workflows coming from HPC. And then if we want to be optimal in terms of elapsed time, in terms of power consumption, we need to specialize the different hardware components for each steps in the workflow. So sometimes that's going to be full CPU based, and most of the time that will be a combination of a CPU plus accelerators. And obviously that will be very complex to manage and to use. So this is why having a unified environment at the software level is crucial. So we need to have, in a perfect world, one compiler, one programming language, and one library, in order we can compile once and run on many different targets. And for that, having open source systems is crucial. And I'm not talking about what's going to happen in the future. If you look at today, this concept of modular computing, this is something we start observing in Germany at Jülich, one of the most advanced supercomputing center in terms of preparing the future mainstream supercomputers. So they have already this booster system that is in place and that is effective. It's part of the top 10 machine in the world. And we can see in Asia, in Japan, the machine that has been installed at the University of Tokyo, delivered by Fujitsu, combining x86 with ARM processors, and also combined with GPUs from NVIDIA. So quite complex and quite representative of a future modular architecture. In Singapore as well, we can see that, and I guess that everyone in the room is familiar with Singapore, and they already have implemented such a modular concept. So it's not theoretical anymore, it's already in the field, it's already used by many people. And when you translate that into architecture for the compute engines, then you will have different modules in the HPC data center, and that will be combined not only theoretically but also in real fact with external computing in the cloud. So on-premise computing plus cloud computing, and then you will have a very complex mixture of different compute devices to operate. This is why if you can leverage at least on a single instruction set for the CPU, that's going to make the manageability of this modular architecture much easier. So in terms of conclusion, we can say that the future supercomputers will be modular. They will be massively non-homogeneous, combining one general purpose processor with different accelerators. This is why that with modularity, we need to be open, we need to be agile, and we need to be data-driven at the CPU level. The most interesting part, in my view, is also in the software area, where if we want to avoid to be trapped in a proprietary environment, the only way to go is open source and standard software stack and standard languages. So open source, open source, open source is the only way to go, and I believe very much in open source model from this aspect. So now look at the specification of Nexascale microprocessor based on the description I just have made about the future architectures. So I mentioned that the general purpose processors have to be extremely open in order it can operate with many different accelerators, GPUs, FPGAs, neuromorphic accelerators, cryptographic, quantum accelerators, and so on and so forth. Because the real raw compute engine will not be in the CPU anymore. That will be on the accelerator side. And then that will be extremely diversified. You will have the GPUs, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel. You will have FPGAs. You will have the more specialized machine learning stuff coming from GraphCore, Cerebras, Ambanova. And tomorrow you will have quantum accelerators from Pascal, for instance, that has been funded quite recently in France to design an accelerator that will be installed next year or the year after. So that will be the purpose of general purpose processor, to drive accelerators and to be excellent for everything that doesn't fit in accelerators. So what should be the characteristics? If you look at this chart, on the x-axis you can see the peak performance. On the y-axis you can see the capacity of the processor to be data-driven. So byte per flop is the best way to measure that. That could be also measured with memory bandwidth, but byte per flop is characteristic to supercomputers. So we can see that GPUs, or more generally speaking, accelerators, will deliver the flops, 64-bit, 32-bit, or 16 bits, while the CPUs, and we can see many existing CPUs, have to deliver the byte per flop, so the memory bandwidth, in order they are extremely efficient when they have to crunch a data. So, for instance, if we want to have at the same time very high flops rate and byte per flop ratio, that would mean that for, let's say, a 40 teraflop double precision GPUs, we would have about 38 HBM stack connected on the GPU. I let you imagine the crazy cost of this beast, regardless the technical considerations, because I'm sure it's quite unmanageable in terms of microprocessor design and packaging, combining so many HBM with the compute engine itself. And for a 70 teraflop engine, that would be even worse. So you can forget to have something that would combine simultaneously peak performance at flop level and peak byte per flop ratio. So there would be some specialization. On the CPU, efficiency will be driven by memory bandwidth and high byte per flop ratio. And the European processor is targeting to be the best in the world from this aspect. So we can see that we can expect from a general purpose processor to drive the memory bandwidth, to have a very high memory bandwidth, to be easy to optimize. As a consequence, the vectors in the microprocessor will be short, because if you work with, let's say, 1024-bit vectors, this is complex to optimize, while short vectors are easy to obtain. Obviously, on real applications, that microprocessor will deliver high performances, and obviously will have a much better performance per watt ratio. And that will be basically a data orchestrator combining HBM, DDR, many PCI Express lanes in order it can directly drive many accelerators connected through PCI Express, and today and in the future be fully compatible with CXL protocol that delivers very interesting features for disaggregated data centers. But this is yet another point of discussion. At the software level, we need to have a transparent integration of the end-to-end data flow, IoT to edge, to data center, to cloud. So everything has to be easy to port, to optimize. We have to massively rely on open source tools. We need to have unified development tools in order that ultimately we can compile once and run on many different targets, as I have already mentioned. And when we look at that in terms of real efficiency on supercomputers, all the numbers here are coming from the top 500 list. You can see on the x-axis, the byte per flop ratio. And you can see on the y-axis, the HPCG efficiency, which is representative of a real workload or real application using memory bandwidth over the peak performance. So we used to use that ratio for HPL on a very good microprocessor or supercomputers has an HPL efficiency around 60%, 70%, or 80% of the peak. Unfortunately, with HPCG, this is a totally different story. Most of the supercomputers today have an HPCG efficiency over peak that is below 2%. 2%. So you pay a crazy price for a supercomputer that will deliver on most of the classical applications less than 2% of the peak performance. On the best supercomputers in the last decade was the K supercomputer in Japan that delivered an efficiency that was 5.5%. So I let you imagine how poor it is, assuming that the K machine was a fantastic machine at that time. On Fugaku, the machine that is number one today, is the best in terms of byte per flop ratio, and his HPCG efficiency is above 3%, which is a great achievement. So with the European microprocessor, we intend to be north of 6% thanks to the byte per flop ratio that we will have, meaning that whatever the peak of the CPU, then the real efficiency on real applications, meaning the part of the applications not running on the accelerators, that part will be very efficient and very easy to use. This is the very specific goal. So basically, the conclusion of this part is to say there is no need to compete with specialized devices like GPUs with the accelerator, with the general purpose processor. We need to have an optimal performance per watt. For this purpose, we need to increase the memory subsystem performance, so to optimize the byte per flop ratio. So we need much better byte per flop ratio than today. We target in Europe, with the European processor, 0.5 plus, let's say 0.6 byte per flop ratio, and that will be the best in the world from this aspect at that time. So if I want to conclude my presentation, and we will have more time for discussing, I would say that when we observe in the US what's going on the new announcement from new companies, it looks at the market for the next couple of years will be structured with SoC. From NVIDIA has announced the combination of their Grace ARM-based CPU with their future Hopper GPU. AMD has a SoC with their EPYC CPUs driving their future Radeon MI200 accelerators. This is the one you will have in the Frontier and in the El Capitan machine. Intel will deliver its own SoC combining their Xeon processor with their Ponte Vecchio accelerator that will drive the Aurora. And we start seeing for machine learning applications other SOCs from Graphcore, from Cerebras, from Samba, and all of them will find their place in the future exascale and post-exascale modular architecture. I have no doubt about that. But indeed, what we can see is that HPC as a whole is entering in its Cambrian era. So like the Cambrian life explosion with an incredible diversity of life under many different forms, we will see an incredible diversity in the HPC world. So we need to address that. And we are designing the European processor specifically for this purpose, not maximizing the flops rate, but maximizing the capacity of the processor to be a data orchestrator and to deliver the best in class for a CPU, a byte-per-flop ratio on real efficiency on real applications. So for that, we will have an open approach, and we have an open approach. We want to be extremely efficient at the application level. We want to have a processor very easy to use on any aspect with open source tools, starting with GCC and all open source scientific libraries. We want to be able to address the needs of modularity, and we want to have a seamless data and workflow integration from IoT to HPC and cloud, meaning in the short term, leveraging on ARM instruction set. And ultimately, for us, the objective we have, because we need to address all the European needs, is to have no lock-in solution or mechanism, so to massively rely on open architectures, open hardware when it's going to be mature, based on RISC-V, on open software. That is specifically the goal of EPI, and this is our intention to address all those needs, starting the very first generation of microprocessor and on the next generations that will follow in 24, 25, and so on. So I am finished with this presentation, and I hope there will be some questions or at least open discussions. Just a question. Should I now disconnect or?
No.
How does
it just stay where you are. So we have. I don't see questions. We don't see many questions from the audience today. So maybe I will ask you. On one of your slides, you had the Calray, a French company, and we had the pleasure of hosting Calray CTO for our 2 years ago at our conference, when the conference was not virtual. He actually came to Warsaw. And so my question is, what's the place of Calray in EPI in architecture? Because it looked like it was repositioned for automotive, for IoT, but will it be suitable for general purpose architecture?
Suitable for a general purpose processor. It's quite specialized, I would say, for embedded computing and for machine learning on artificial intelligence as a whole. So the intention we have with EPI is to port their architecture on IP to 7 nanometers. In order, we can validate the quality of their accelerators with leading edge manufacturing process. And once it is validated, that will give the opportunity for Calray to deliver their own product on their own as an accelerator or for HPC or as a specific device for automotive industry. And you know, they work very closely with NXP. That will use their product for the integrated solutions they manufacture for for the car manufacturing industry. One of the purposes of EPI is obviously to work on a general purpose processor, but it is also to integrate accelerator IP, like the one from Calray, like the FPGA from Manta, like the STX accelerator developed at Fraunhofer, ETH Zurich, and the University of Bologna, and to test the RISC-V accelerators developed by BSC and Semi Dynamics, in order we can start building up the foundations of the future European RISC-V general purpose processors. That will not happen over the night, especially with RISC-V. This is just at the beginning of the story, and we don't expect to have a high-end general purpose processor with a solid software ecosystem based on RISC-V before 7 to 8 years, and I would bet on a decade from now.
Well, but that's very interesting. In the RIAC discussions and elsewhere, Mateo Valero, the director of Barcelona Supercomputing Center, is a great proponent, very strong proponent of RISC-V architecture. But we must acknowledge Mateo for pushing ARM, because actually he was the one who created the first ARM-based HPC systems many years ago, and now he's pushing. So he's breaking multiple barriers in architecture, and Fugaku is the best proof that he is right very often.
You know, the point is not about the instruction set. The real point is about the architecture. So from this standpoint, Matteo has been a visionary, for sure.
Yes.
And I work very closely with him, and we are fully aligned, indeed. Meaning that BSC is setting up let's say the fundamental layers at low TRL, making research, testing, while the industry that has to spend hundreds of millions of euros to have a product has to be extremely careful about its investment. So the industry is much slower to move in order that the money is not wasted for nothing. Because if we come with a very innovative architecture today and there is no application, nobody to buy it, nobody to use it, that will be a massive failure for Europe. This is why I explained at the beginning that working with low TRL, like Matteo is doing at BSC with RISC-V, and working at high TRL, like we are doing with ARM, is the best way for Europe can be back in the HPC race for delivering compute engines.
Right. Well, let me check if there are questions. No questions. So I think I will have to thank Jean-Marc. Of course, there are ways of connecting with Jean-Marc. And one very important thing I have forgotten to mention and instruct people, there is a networking facility here. One of the sort of weakest side of running virtual conferences that we don't meet each other, we don't eat lunches, we don't have coffee together, there's no opportunity for informal networking, which is a great pity. Of course, there are advantages of being able to sort of virtually bring people from all over the globe, and that is a tremendous advantage. But there is a virtual networking room here. If you go in your platform, please explore, go to home, and in one of the placeholders, there is something called networking. And you may very well use the 20 minutes or so plus 25 minutes break that we'll soon have before the next session for networking. And I'll be very happy to meet, and we can cross-talk, and we can see each other. And I already see Gerardo from Mexico City, and then my old friends from Singapore and others. So I'll be very happy to talk to you. And of course, I encourage everybody else to meet and network. That's one announcement. Another one is workshops. A part of 3-day conference. We have workshops on Thursday and Friday. Many of them run by very interesting vendors like Lenovo and Huawei. I'm sure that they will interest many of you, and there will be lots of space devoted to AI and new methods and visualization and so forth. So I encourage you to continue with the conference beyond the Wednesday, on Thursday and Friday, and participate in workshops. And as the conference itself, the workshops are free. So with this, I will end the second session. The third session of today will be chaired by Ronald Luyten, our old friend. And with this, thank you very much for your attention, and let's break for networking or coffee or short rest. Thank you.